Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. Today we are on episode number 173 and we have a very special guest with us today. We have Giovanni Barca from BMO Mortgages. Gio, welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast.
Thank you for having me. Very first podcast, so go easy on me.
You're gonna be great here. We have so many things to talk to you about. It's great to have you on. And maybe before we get into some of the things we're going to talk, maybe just tell the listeners or viewers a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now, so they know that when you make some comments in a few minutes, how qualified you are to make those comments.
Okay, well, I could definitely talk about myself. Um, I am. I think I have probably about just over 20 years into banking, different types of banking background. I started off in collections, so I've learned about the real world economics out there of how people earn and spend. And after a few years of third-party collections, I moved into non-prime financing and into banking. The position I held just before this one was litigation manager with one of the big fives, which means I was in charge of working with default mortgages. Um, that was a real eye-opening experience. I did that for almost 10 years, where I was working with clients who really were faced with financial distress to the point where losing the home was the immediate possibility for them. Um, After 10 years of doing that, I had an opportunity to switch over to the sales side. I have enough experience on the mortgage products that I thought, let's put a bit of a positive spin to all this experience and give clients the finance that they're looking for when they're asking for it. So I now am on the sales force. I am the front line for Bank of Montreal. I provide mortgage products to all prospects out there. Um, I am able to wrap it all around with a nice package where I do a little bit of counseling, make sure that they're not overextending themselves, that they are getting the right mortgage product for what their personal needs are. Um, and it's been a 4-year run now, where I've been on the sales side, and I'm quite enjoying it.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? When you're talking about mortgages, it's so easy to over leverage yourself and make a bad decision. And I think it's great to really have somebody that can do a full 360 and really understand the client and their situation and put them in the right product. And with your background, especially in litigation, it just reminds us of how difficult that process can be and what the consequences can be of making a bad decision.
Absolutely, and it's a reality in today's market as well. There's a lot of that happening. We hear of foreclosures more than we like to.
Yeah, there's lenders exercising remedies a little more often than anybody really likes in a good functioning economy right now. And a lot of this starts with the pre-approval process. And what borrowers think they got pre-approved for, maybe not actually what they got, right? So maybe take us through that and why what's a typical pre-approvals? Let's start there.
So there's two ways that I know of typical. The most common one is clients call their mortgage specialist, mortgage broker, and they say, I want to know what I can afford. You're taken through a few general questions. What's your income? What do you owe? What are your monthly payments? And all of a sudden they give you, they say, sorry about that. They say, here's what you qualify for. Um, and the other way that I'm more used to is where I ask for the full financial disclosure. I will pull your credit bureau. I will put specific parameters within your budget for property taxes. I ask you, are you looking for a freehold? Are you considering a condominium? So that I can build in that potential average condo fee based on your that you're looking for. And in general, I add about 1% of your desired purchase price or your maximum budget. That would as a budget for property taxes and heating cost. And then if you tell me that there's a potential condo fee, then I will add that on top of that. That is a very generous budget. For example, on a $950,000 purchase, that is $9,500 a year to cover property taxes and heat. In most areas, that is a very healthy budget. So when I'm working with a realtor directly, I say, we have this big budget. However, if you show me an MLS prior to putting an offer in, then I will adjust that budget and potentially we will find a few extra dollars in the client's buying power.
So Gio, I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about pre-approvals, right? And I think our
Mhm.
industry is kind of under the assumption that if you have a pre-approval, it's a green light to spend that budget, right? But a lot of times that pre-approval is riddled with conditions and certain obligations, and
Mhm.
people get themselves into trouble because they go up to the maximum, or their situation changes after they've bought and before the closing, which also affects their situation, right? So um, sometimes I find that a pre-approval is a bit deceiving,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of situations out there that limit the effectiveness of it. So, um, can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And really it comes down to, the person on the other end, like myself, to coach. Because when I do provide a pre-approval, of course, appraisal, for example, if you overspend or you overbid and then the appraisal does not come in to support your purchase price or your offer, well, that spread is not included in your pre-approval. That is over and above your down payment and the mortgage amount that you've been pre-approved for. If I don't coach you on, this pre-approval is based on you having total monthly liabilities, excluding the potential mortgage payment of, let's say, $2,000. And you go out there and say, well, I'm pre-approved now, so I can go spend. I'm going to go get myself a Porsche. Right? It's summertime. I need a convertible. Well, guess what? When we actually go and convert that pre-approval into a live deal, and that payment may come up, and now all of a sudden your total monthly liabilities go from $2,000 to $4,000 a month. But that is a drastic change in total debt servicing. Now all of a sudden that pre-approval is out the door. So those are usually the two major issues that I do see. Credit, usually it is not a concern because I do pull your credit at the time. So your credit score is going to be used to generate that pre-approval at that time. Um, but in terms of making it solid, it really comes down to explaining what that pre-approval means, explaining how you came with that pre-approval, and then coaching on how to make sure that that pre-approval stands the test of time up until you make that offer.
So, Gio, maybe you could help me out with this because I'm on the closing side of these transactions. We're trying to get deals closed, and we're
Mm-hmm.
running into so many issues on closings where a client is pre-approved. Let's just put a number to it. Let's say they're looking for property for $1 million, and they've got a pre-approval. They've gone through all the tests that you're running them through, and they're approved for a mortgage up to for 700,000, let's say. And then they use their friendly neighborhood agent from Sutton Summit, and they find that property, and they're buying it for $1 million. But somewhere in that approval, it said it's subject to another appraisal just before
Mhm.
closing. And all of a sudden, we're in June of 2025. The market's down a little bit. Lender shows up and does an appraisal 2 days before closing, and they say, you know what, this house, even though they're paying $1 million, it's only worth 950 right now. So instead of giving them 700,000, we're giving them 650 or something like that. And all of a sudden, they're scrambling 2 days before closing because they're $50,000 short.
Hmm.
And we
I don't.
that a lot.
Interesting. Well, it has never been my experience in my current role. My pre-approvals are good for 130 days. And once we switch the pre-approval to an approval, and the key difference there is now we have an address, right? The pre-approval, the real thing that is not there is we don't have an address that it's attached to. Now, if I give you a pre-approval of $900,000 mortgage, your purchase price could be whatever it is above that, depending on the mortgage type that it is. If it's insured, your ceiling is $1.5 million, right? But if you're putting 20% down, your income supports a $900,000 mortgage. You go buy a $2 million home, you best have that down payment to cover that spread. In terms of doing a second appraisal just before closing, I've never had to do that. In fact, my process is I receive an offer, I put in the application, I right away submit for the appraisal. We don't do a second appraisal. That's now the approval is in place. The closing could be 4 months from now, and nothing else is done. We don't pull a credit bureau just before closing. We don't do a second appraisal. It's a done deal.
Well,
So
and
I'm not
that's
sure.
no, that's
Yeah.
really
So
important because there are people out there that are using lenders and they're using mortgage brokers that aren't getting that approved. Well, they're not getting, I guess, from the pre-approval process to the firm approval process, without conditions. So if they did have, a 4 month closing, a lot of times they've been subject to that secondary appraisal, and it just kills the deal because markets fluctuate, and
sure.
you expose yourself to that market. It happens to be down a little bit in June, and all of a sudden they're short funds. So I guess your answer, Gio, is like they're using the wrong lender and the wrong mortgage broker to get these things in place because they're at their own peril if they think they've got approved for a mortgage, but it's subject to that late condition.
Of course. Now I don't know if they're using the wrong lender or mortgage broker, but they're definitely not using me. That I can say for certain.
Yeah, yeah, David Korman. The one thing I love about working with Geo and with BMO is how they go through their approval process, right? The fact that most mortgage brokers get all the information from clients and rely on the client's word to come up with the pre-approval. Geo goes a step further. Geo actually collects all the paperwork, collects the notices of assessments, collects the pay stubs, collects all the information. And then once he's in possession of that information, then he issues the approval based on the information collected. So the initial condition of providing that supporting documentation is already fulfilled. And I think that adds a layer of scrutiny and a layer of assurance to both the bank and the person receiving the pre-approval that, those numbers are in fact verified and can be relied upon. And then the other thing I like is that, the appraisal is ordered right away. and the house gets vetted and gets appraised right away, and then everybody knows where they stand. The bank is protected right away, the client's protected, and it gives a bit more of an assurance position to the person to move forward. Now we all know that these pre-approvals are conditional, and if any circumstances change, the bank has the right to, you know, do a second appraisal and go through the process again. But I think if there's a solid process in place at the beginning that protects both the bank and the borrower, then there's less likely a situation arising that the bank is, you know, going back and readjusting and relooking at all these figures just before final closing, which is avoiding some of those situations that you've described.
Yeah, at another situation that we've been dealing with recently, again due to current economic conditions, is let's say it's a husband and wife and they're buying the property together and they need both incomes there, and all of a sudden somebody loses their job. It's been pre-approved, everything's good, and then someone gets laid off, and now they got an income issue. So what do they do in that situation?
Well, so that all comes down to timing. Did they place the offer? Did they receive my firm approval? And then they lose their job?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I wouldn't know. And because we don't follow up with yet another check, because we've already done the work. I've already asked for recent pay stubs. I've asked for potentially a letter of employment at the time of that offer to give them that firm approval. We've done our due diligence. Things in life do happen. We are seeing an uptick in unemployment. So could it happen that between now and 3 months from now somebody can lose their job? But if everything is put in place already, their lawyer would have already received a package from BMO with instructions. We're just waiting for that closing date to happen. Um, we we have a similar process when it comes to new construction as well. Our builder program is fantastic when it comes to that. Our pre-approve our firm approvals, they're not pre-approvals. They're good for up to 3 years. And we validate income and appraisal at the time of offer. And we do not check again, which means up to 3 years from now, the new property closes, and we're just waiting for that date to happen. Unless they made material changes to the offer, where now they've increased the purchase price, or they want to add upgrades last minute. Now that's considered a material change, which means that I have to now reverse the approval and re-underwrite the deal. That's when we're going to say, well, hold on, let's let's make sure you qualify now for what the new material change is. But if there's no changes at all, the offer from 3 years ago is going through. And that could have prevented a lot of issues that you're probably facing with closing new construction today, where they received this 120-day approval from whoever they used 3 years ago. What that approval has come and gone. Now they're struggling to say, well, now I need my mortgage because I received my notice saying possession is in 60 days. Give us proof of mortgage. We're having a discrepancy in appraisal. If they were with the BMO program, they would not be facing this issue at all.
That's interesting, Gio. And just to tie it into the other point, so you give that pre-construction pre-approval, it's good for 3 years, and it's not subject to BMO doing another appraisal of the actual value right before closing, because that's where the new construction issue really is right now. That the values are down. People are supposed to close on these contracts that they signed 3 years ago, but the value is down, and some lenders are don't have that 3-year binding approval process, and they're appraising it now, saying, hey, current market conditions, it's not worth the purchase price you agreed to pay 3 years ago, we're lending you less money. And that's why they're
Correct.
scrambling. So okay. So but you're guaranteed for good for 3 years. And then beyond 3 years, if it gets extended beyond that, what happens?
We can extend the those approvals. They still remain firm. The only thing that may change is the rate that we are going to hold that approval for. We use a higher cap rate when it comes to holding an approval for 3 years, for example. And that is not it's not binding. It's a placeholder approval. And if we were to look at pre-COVID, it would have been a really good process because the rate cap would have been much higher than what the rate was at time of closing, which means they got a really great discount. So they got approved, let's say, at 4%, received a closing interest rate in the twos. We are somewhat in the same situation right now, same economy, where I'll probably give you approval for up to 3 years, and it'll be in the high fives, maybe even touch a six, and that'll be a placeholder. But if you're approved at that rate, and you close, let's say 2 years from now, the rates are not going to be that high, and we're going to still give you the lowest rate up to 120 days prior to closing. That's not a material change. That's just a pricing change. And you always receive the lower rate. When the situation is flipped, where somebody who purchased at the very low end of the interest rates, and we gave you a rate cap of let's say 3%, and then you closed right after the all the rate increases. Well, now you're protected because we guaranteed you that 3% 3 years ago, and while everyone else is now qualifying at six, so you keep that 3 years. If you go beyond that 3 years, then we run into issues because now I have to reapprove you or requalify you at the higher. Um, so that's the only time that it could become sticky.
Yeah, so in that situation, because the rate is in likely increase from what the original expectation was, then it might also result in a lesser advance amount on the other end in order to make sure they can make their payments, right?
Yes, an increase in interest rate is a material change because now it changes affordability, it
Mm,
changes income requirements. And so it could be an issue.
right. Okay, this has been very, very helpful
Yeah,
explanation, Gio.
Gio, it's kind of amazing how there's different professionals out there and there's different products, and as realtors and as professionals in the industry, we really have to educate ourselves on how working with these different professionals can impact our business and the experience for our clients. And
Yes.
especially in a market like we're facing today, where it is a shifting market. It is difficult out there. David Korman, we've spoken about this on many episodes, that you guys are finding it tougher to close transactions out
Yeah.
there. I think working with a professional that does all the pre-qualifications ahead of time, does the appraisal ahead of time, and puts their clients in a situation that there's less ambiguity moving forward, right? And less chance of changes happening right before closing. I think that protects the transaction and protects the closing and ensures that it's a positive experience for everybody. So if you're listening to this podcast, do your research. If you've been working with one mortgage broker and haven't really gone out there and seeing what other products are available and how those mortgage brokers, how deeply they get involved in that pre-approval process at the beginning, I think it's an eye opener for a lot of professionals out there. And I think, we need to work together to make sure that come closing time, that it's the absolute best experience for our clients, that there's no surprises, and that the transaction actually closes as it's supposed to.
Exactly. Yeah, as an example, this just happened yesterday. I had a builder in the Waterloo area. They called me saying, "No, I have this approval. You signed it. Is this really you?" I said, "Yes, it is me." And I said, "You know, do you already work with the bank when it comes to financing?" And I said, "Well, yes, we have the big relationship with this other big five bank. They give us this 1 year." Approval. And my question was, well, how would you like a guaranteed 3 year approval? And they said, well, that would be fantastic. I said, well, are you aware of this program that we offer? No, I've never heard of it. And I said, great. Well, put me in touch with your CEO. Let's have this conversation, and let's see what we could do. And he said, well, if you give me a 3 year firm approval, that means it's a guaranteed closed transaction. I said, exactly.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a good thing for you? And he goes, that would be an amazing thing. Great. So now we're trying to close this appointment with the CEO, this builder company. But knowledge is where the transaction really lies. In fact, you being a David, a real estate lawyer, you're the second guy who receives these builder offers to go through the terms and conditions, and what will it cost at occupancy, and all, going through and protecting your client. Well, the great question is, do you have a long-term firm approval in place? And if you don't, well, go get one, because I've seen many transactions not followed through for this specific reason. And not that I just said those words, I'm thinking I'm going to start calling a bunch of real estate lawyers and have the same conversation, because in normal terms, when it's just a resale home, the real estate lawyer is at the end of the transaction. Well, when it comes to construction, you're number two on the list, or at least you definitely should be.
Right. Yeah, and on new construction, the builders, the sellers, want to see pre-approvals. They want to see something firm and real before they
Hmm.
accept the agreement of purchase and sale, because they don't want to waste their time with buyers that
Right.
can't close. And this really started when the market was hot and there was a lineup at the door and everything. So they weren't even going to let anybody in unless they knew that
Hmm.
they had the ability to close a transaction. But even still, right now, like I had dinner with a couple builders a couple days ago, two different, one builds condos, one builds detached homes, and they're still being so careful with qualifying every single buyer, because they're struggling to get their transactions closed right now. They want to make sure they've got the financing available. They've got a real approval, not a pre-approval subject to 20 different conditions, and it could disappear 3 years from now because people can't qualify.
Right. And I have seen the evolution where builders used to accept any pre-approval from anyone, whether it was a bank or was a mortgage broker, and now they strictly want one from one of the big fives, maybe even the top six banks, and that's it. But again, there's a difference. The one bank will only give you an approval that's good for 120 days on a closing of let's say 2 years. Well, how good is it? Some other banks will go as far as giving you a 1 year approval, and then others will give you more than a year with conditions of, we're going to check your credit, then we're going to check, do an appraisal 90 days prior to closing or 120 days prior to closing. And then there's the one that says, we'll give you a firm approval up to 3 years. We're not going to check again. Which one do you want?
Well, I think the whole industry, the builders, the lawyers, the clients, everybody wants to have some assurances that come closing date, the transaction's going to close successfully. So this has been great, Gio. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you're listening to the David and David on Real Estate podcast, send us your questions. We want to hear from you. Get involved. And thanks so much for listening, everybody. Gio, we're going to have you back on a subsequent episode, and we're going to dive deeper into some of these topics. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and tune in next time to the David and David on Real Estate podcast.
Thanks for having me.